From the chariots and bows of ancient Egypt to the swords and spears of Rome, to the tanks and planes of Britain and Germany, there have been many armies, great and small, throughout the ages. These armies have had thousands and thousands of leaders, some great who were loved by their men and led great victories, and some were failures of both their men and their causes, losing battle after battle. This is the list of the 100 leaders who were the greatest in history. This list attempts to take into account their battlefield strategy, overall grand strategy, as well as how they handled logistics, and what they were able to accomplish with the number of troops they had. Please also keep in mind that while I do think this is a good list, at the end of the day it is my own opinion, and it's just for fun. Number 100. Giuseppe Garibaldi. Unification of the Italian states was a long process, but it started with the main military figure being Giuseppe Garibaldi. Garibaldi actually started his military career and honed his skills in South America. As a revolutionary and a bit of a troublemaker, he had got himself sentenced to death in Italy and had to flee to South America. While there, he had continued his revolutionary ways and kicked off his military career in Brazil and Uruguay. Garibaldi returned to Italy and played a key role in both the First and Second Wars for Italian unification. While the First War was largely lost when Garibaldi joined, during the Second War for Italian unification, he was able to successfully conquer Sicily and most of southern Italy, which ultimately led to the creation of the Kingdom of Italy. In later campaigns, Garibaldi was also able to integrate Rome as well as parts of northern Italy into the kingdom, uniting what is most of modern-day Italy. Garibaldi was known for his ability in guerrilla warfare and leading his small band of fighters known as the Red Shirts to victory against much larger forces. Garibaldi continues as one of the key figures of Italian unification and one of the greatest military minds of his time. Number 99. Oliver Cromwell. Oliver Cromwell was born in an extremely turbulent time in English history. He was able to use his great leadership and surprising military genius to become Lord Protector of all England. Cromwell came from a wealthy family, but not one with a lot of influence. However, he used his wealth and what little influence he had to get into Parliament. And during the First English Civil War, Cromwell, despite never having been a military man, was able to muster his own force, and he had an immediate knack for military leadership. While observing the initial battles of the war, Cromwell had noted the efficacy of cavalry, and that the parliamentarian army did not have any. His force that he had gathered were trained to be the cavalry for the parliamentarian army, and became the key component to the defeat of the Royalists in the First and Second English Civil Wars. His fighting force and leadership earned him the Lord Protector role, and he became the most powerful man in England. His legacy is a bit mixed, and he was even posthumously exhumed and actually executed for regicide and possible war crimes. However, his status as one of the greatest military leaders in English history is not in doubt. Number 98. William Tecumseh Sherman. William Sherman was one of the most famous as well as controversial generals of the American Civil War. Sherman was one of the first to really push for the idea that we now know in modern times as total war. This is the idea that you must wage war not only to defeat your opponent's army, but to defeat the will of the entire population to fight. When the Civil War started, Sherman was commissioned to be a colonel, and then promoted after success during the Battle of Shiloh. Early in the war, Sherman struggled with depression and anxiety that led to press releases calling him crazy. He overcame these difficulties and was promoted to command in General Grant's Western Army. Sherman helped in the crucial campaign of Vicksburg and had earned a reputation as a good general. When Grant was promoted to general of the Union forces, he promoted Sherman to command of the Western Union Army. Sherman used this army to capture Atlanta, and then his subsequent march to the sea successfully cut the South in half. While the march was controversial, and to this day many people question the ethics of the acts that took place under Sherman's command, there can be no doubt that his total war tactics brought about a swifter end to the war. Number 97. Vo Nguyen Giap. How did the Vietnamese army manage to hold off several of the most powerful nations in the world and win a war to unite their country? The primary reason was the military genius of Vo Nguyen Giap. Giap fought in several different conflicts, most notably the First Indochina War and the Vietnam War, but also played a role in defending the new country of Vietnam against the Chinese invasion. During the First Indochina War, Giap successfully transformed the army from a ragtag group of soldiers into a formidable fighting force that won a decisive victory over the French and forced them to declare the independence of the region into North and South Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, he was the mastermind behind the creation of the incredible Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was what allowed the Viet Minh to wage successful guerrilla warfare and be better supplied than the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces, which contributed to the frustration and eventually the complete abandonment of South Vietnam by the U.S. This led to victory for North Vietnam and unification of the country into Vietnam. He later helped to repel an attack from the Chinese as well, but is still remembered today as the key military leader in defeating the U.S. and the unification of the country. Number 96. Robert the Bruce. In 1290, Margaret, the last descendant of the royal line of Scotland, died, and the country was plunged into chaos, which the English saw as an opportunity since they had been trying to bring Scotland under their control for many years. However, they were unsuccessful in conquering Scotland because of the determination and military leadership of Robert the Bruce. In the chaos following the death of Margaret, Robert managed to play a dangerous political game with the King of England and the Scottish nobles that saw him ascend to the throne of Scotland. After many years and much turmoil throughout the country, the Bruce was able to consolidate his power on the throne, bringing him into direct conflict with the English. Early on in the conflict, Robert was defeated in a surprise attack and lost most of his army. He was able to reform what he could, and over the next few years, using a combination of guerrilla tactics and clever maneuvering, he was able to avoid a pitched battle and retake Scotland one castle at a time. Robert was later able to soundly defeat the English, pushing them out of Scotland and completely freeing himself from English rule in 1328. Robert the Bruce was a fierce warrior, and despite constantly being outnumbered, he managed to secure his country and his throne. Number 95. Chester Nimitz. There are many names that come to mind when talking about great generals from World War II, and the U.S. has a long list of them. While not always mentioned near the top, Chester Nimitz was the key leader in the American victory in the Pacific. When the Americans entered the war after the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, they were woefully underprepared. Not only had their fleet in the Pacific been severely damaged, but they were undermanned and outgunned by the Japanese ground force and navy. Nimitz had prior experience with submarine command and was able to use a combination of his submarines and aircraft carriers to put together a fighting force and keep the Japanese Navy at bay while they repaired the fleet at Pearl Harbor. Nimitz realized that he would not be able to rely on his battleships because of the damage they had taken, so made the aircraft carriers the centerpiece of his fleet, which would change naval warfare forever. His carriers were what allowed him to win the decisive Battle of Midway, which changed the course of the war in the Pacific. He then decisively defeated the Japanese Navy and Air Force at the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Later in the war, he led the island-hopping campaign that brought the Americans right to the doorstep of the Japanese home islands. Nimitz was the key figure in defeating the Japanese and is one of only 4 Americans to ever achieve the rank of Fleet Admiral. Number 94. Andre Massena. Andre Massena was one of the most successful marshals to serve under Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars. Massena had actually achieved significant success before serving under Napoleon, and was one of the leaders of their army of Italy when Napoleon was made the general of that army. Massena saw success in the early campaigns of Napoleon in Italy. He was a key figure in the victories against the Italian states, as well as the early victory against the Austrians. He also led his troops to victory at the Second Battle of Zurich, but possibly his greatest achievement was his defense during the Siege of Genoa. Despite disease and a lack of food, Massena managed to hold out for 60 days and force the Austrians to sign a ceasefire that did not involve him surrendering, but would allow him to leave with his army. This delay allowed Napoleon to cross the Alps and win one of his signature victories against the Austrians at the Battle of Marengo. Massena was one of the few marshals that Napoleon trusted to lead his own army without complete guidance by Napoleon himself. This sort of recognition shows the skill of Massena and is why he is remembered as one of the greatest generals of that time. Number 93. Saladin. The man who was remembered as one of the great conquerors by both the Christians and the Muslims, Yusuf ibn Ayyub, or Saladin, as he is more commonly known, founded the Ayyubid Empire, one of the largest of the time. Early in his life, he was sent to Egypt to help consolidate the power there under the Fatimid Caliphate, but when the ruler there died, Saladin dissolved the Fatimid rule and aligned with the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate. Saladin was then able to conquer Syria and parts of Palestine over the next few years, consolidating his power throughout the region, and the territory under his rule was to be known as the Ayyubid Empire. After conquering the Muslim areas throughout the region, Saladin turned to the Crusader states. Under Saladin, Muslim armies would capture back much of Palestine, and most importantly would retake the symbolic and religiously important city of Jerusalem. This marked the turning point in the Muslim and Christian struggles in the Levant. Even though Saladin had mixed success later in life, especially in his battles with Richard the Lionheart, his early conquests formed one of the largest empires in the region and guaranteed that the Crusaders would never again have a significant presence in the Middle East. Number 92. Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim. Was he a sympathizer with the German Reich who maybe even agreed with their cause, or did he join with them because he had no other choice? We may never know the true answer to that question, but one thing for sure is that Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim was able to defend Finland against the vastly superior Soviet army, and against all odds was able to prevent Finland from being overrun. Early in his military career, Mannerheim was actually a soldier for the Imperial Russian Army, and even fought in the Russo-Japanese War. He fled Russia during the Revolution and drifted in and out of politics and the military during the complicated years of World War I and the Finnish Civil War. However, at the start of World War II, Mannerheim took charge of the Finnish army, and with a Soviet invasion looming, he set up a brilliant defensive line, which became known as the Mannerheim Line. This allowed his extremely outnumbered army to not only hold, but inflict over 1 million casualties on the Soviets. Later in the war, with the assistance of Germany, he was even able to push the Soviets back and take back all the territory that had been ceded to hold off the Soviets. While his life and politics still remain a bit of a question, his military genius and leadership do not. Number 91. Albrecht von Wallenstein. Albrecht von Wallenstein, despite being born into a Protestant noble family, was one of the primary leaders of the Catholic armies during the 30 Years' War. Wallenstein was born to a poor family, but he married a very wealthy widow, and when she died, he inherited her wealth. This allowed him to raise an army and assisted in defeating the Bohemian Revolt at the start of the 30 Years' War. This gained him more land, fame, and wealth, and he raised another army, defeating the King of Denmark, forcing him to sign a peace treaty leaving the war. Wallenstein was always extremely ambitious politically, and his ambitions saw him relieved of command despite his victories. However, after Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden led the Protestants to several victories, Ferdinand II recalled Wallenstein to duty, realizing he was the best commander he had. Wallenstein returned and led the army successfully, being one of the few men that was able to defeat Gustavus Adolphus in battle. Despite his victories, Wallenstein's political ambitions and alleged betrayal of the Holy Roman Emperor led to his assassination. Despite his assassination, his status as one of the greatest military leaders of the time stands to this day. Thanks for watching. I do hope you enjoyed that video. Either way, leave me a comment letting me know what you thought of it, and I will see you all in the next one.